If you want to take your Bible this morning and turn to Luke, the Bible's the source for that love that we run to, that love that we can never be separated from. And Luke 6, we're getting back into Luke after a few weeks away from Luke. And before I read the text, which is verse 39 through 45, I want to give you a little context. And you know, when you pick the Bible up, it's always good to just kind of stop and think. And if you're doing what is a good habit to do, just got a bookmark and just pick up where you left off, or you're perhaps reading a portion of Scripture repeatedly, which I advocate, then you know what to do. You know where you're at. But it's always good if you just pick up to just stop and think. So remember where we've been. I mean, it's been a few weeks. Look back at chapter 6, verse 12. It was at this time that he, Jesus, and Luke has given us the life of Jesus. What a great privilege that we've got 4 accounts. And Luke is giving the story of Jesus' life as it unfolds. At this time, he, Jesus, went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. The strongest man who ever lived, the perfect man, felt the need constantly. Luke has been noting his prayer life, and he spent all night in prayer before he called his disciples to him when day came, verse 13, and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. He picked out of his followers, of his learners, 12 whom he named as sent ones, apostles, and then he descended with them, verse 17, and stood on a level place, and there was a great multitude of his learners or followers, disciples. So that's the setting. He has prayed all night. He picked out the 12. He comes down, and there are a great throng and of a multitude, it says, and a great throng, notice, of people. So he says there's a big multitude of disciples and then a great throng of people. That's the setting. And they had come, verse 18, to hear him. Boy, that's a good thing. We gather this morning to hear him. And we're going to. Because he gave us his living and abiding word. They gathered to hear him, and they were being healed and helped, and all the multitude, verse 19, were trying to touch him. You can just kind of see the scene. He comes down, and he's there, the disciples that he just named apostles, a greater group of disciples, then this throng of people, and they're to hear him. They want to hear what he has to say, and they want to even touch him. Now that's the setting when he, verse 20, turned his gaze on his disciples and began to say, and we're jumping in now today to quite a discourse that he gave in this setting. Because we've already looked at what's sometimes called the Beatitudes and other teachings that he gave, and we're picking it up at verse 39. And I remind you that this all happened. Notice chapter 7, verse 1. And again, context is easy to figure out if you just kind of look. So look at chapter 7, verse 1. When he'd completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum. So we're in the middle of this time when Jesus had a great throng around him, but he turns and looks at his followers. And it's not unlike today, right now. A great group of us. But Jesus is addressing those who would follow him, those who would learn from him. And I'll say at the outset, because this portion is very parallel to his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. But just by the name of it, I don't think this is the same occasion. That time Jesus went up on the mountain. But Jesus repeated himself. Jesus said the same themes over and over, not redundantly, but because the things that are important, he would emphasize. And so we're hearing some stuff that's really important. But let me just say this at the outset. Following Jesus, learning from Christ, being a Christ follower, Christianity, if you will, is not a list of virtues to work on. It is a relationship to abide in. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be virtue come from that. Not at all. There will be fruit. You'll know them by their fruit, Jesus said in his most famous sermon. He didn't even say that here, but I called this sermon that because you'll see we're going to get into that, and he got into it. You will see the reality of the relationship. The fruit will give testimony to where the root really is. But don't look at Christianity, don't look at your walk with Christ as kind of a bunch of virtues you got to start working on. No. Jesus said, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Abide in me, and you will bear much fruit. Now, having said that, pick it up at verse 39. He also spoke a parable to them. A blind man cannot guide a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? A pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone after he's been fully trained will be like his teacher. And why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, brother, let me take the speck out that's in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out that is in your brother's eye. For there is no good tree which produces bad fruit, nor does, on the other hand, a bad tree which produces good fruit. Each tree is known by its own fruit. For men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they pick grapes from a briar bush. The good man, out of the good treasure of his heart, brings forth what is good, and the evil man, out of the evil treasure, brings forth what is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. And why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts upon them, I'll show you whom he's like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation upon the rock. And when a flood arose, the river burst against that house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who's heard and has not acted accordingly is like a man who built a house upon the ground without any foundation. And the river burst against it, and immediately it collapsed. And the ruin of that house was great. Lord, you are the truth. Every word you spoke is true. Your Spirit is the Spirit of truth. Your truth sets free. We ask you to open our eyes right now that we might see the truth of your word. Amen. The great danger of listening to false teachers, having false guides, the blind leading the blind. Verse 39, he spoke a parable to them. He said, let me tell you something you ought to all understand. It's a simple truth. A blind man cannot guide a blind man, can he? I was on the airplane coming across from Amsterdam, and long flight, you get to know people whether you want to or not, you know. And coming down the aisle with his hand on the stewardess was a guy who was blind. And I thought, wow, I'm sitting here complaining about the cramped quarters in my mind. And I was thinking, boy, am I glad I can see to make my way down that aisle when I have to. But he was being guided by someone who could see, obviously. It would be folly to have a blind person lead a blind person. It's a seeing eye dog. Now, he says, a blind man can't lead a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? Blindness is a theme of the New Testament. The huge majority, if you look up blind, you'll find them in the Gospels. Because Jesus came, he said, to open the eyes of the blind. Luke 4, when he first said what he's here for. And obviously, he did heal blind people. But quite obviously, if you just take the time, which I would encourage you to do, just track it through, and the physical blindness is always picturing a deeper blindness, spiritual blindness. Okay? And Jesus uses both just like we would, as he says here, a blind doesn't guide the blind. No, they'll both fall into a pit. No, you want someone who can see to be your guide. You know, in Matthew 15, Peter came to the Lord and said, Lord, do you realize that what you're saying is offending, scandalizing, tripping up, stumbling the Pharisees? And Jesus said, let them alone. Let the blind guide the blind. He said this very thing. 5 times in Matthew 23, and that is that great chapter where he said, woe to you Pharisees. Woe to you hypocrites. 8 times he said woe to religious hypocrisy. And 5 times he called it blind. And you can go over there and read it. It's in Matthew 23. But, you know, if you summarized it, he said, blindness. You find yourself saying, well, you can swear by the temple, but not by the gold in the temple. Or you can, and they were making little religious distinctions. He said, that's so blind to miss everything. Or you're straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel. What a picture. Majoring on the minutia and swallowing a camel. Oh, I tithe, I give money. But you don't care about justice and righteousness and faithfulness, he said. Now, woe to us if we're so blind as to say, yeah, those Pharisees, that first century, I read a book on them. No, he's talking to us too. Woe to us if we've got our little list of things we do, or we're tithing this and that, and we're neglecting what really counts. Blindness. Matthew 23 ended up saying, you know, you clean the outside of the cup, but you don't worry about the inside. How foolish. You pick up your mug and you just say, well, it's clean on the outside, and you don't bother to look inside. You just look out. If you leave mugs around like I do, there could be 6 weeks worth of growth going on there. You clean the inside out. What's inside is what counts, not the outward. So blindness, it seems to me. In fact, look over at John 9 for just a minute, because John devotes a whole chapter to a blind guy. Turn over there, John 9, verse 39. Remember, he healed that blind guy, and the whole chapter, it's such a sobering characteristic, because Jesus moves from physical blindness to spiritual blindness. And it's so sobering to realize that physically blind people know they're blind. The guy on the plane had a white cane. He had one of the attendants helping him. He knows he's blind. He did well, and we rejoice when someone can do well in their blind. But spiritually blind often don't even know we're blind. So John 9, Jesus summarized the whole situation, verse 39, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Well, those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, "We're not blind too, are we? Are you calling us blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But because you say, 'We see,' your sin remains. If you would only confess your sin, if you'd only confess your blindness, you could see. But you say, 'No, we see,' your blindness, your sin remains." The last occurrence of the word blind is in Revelation. And it's not spoken to Pharisees. It is spoken to a church, the Laodicean church. It's a scathing comment. He says, you've got your money, you've got your stuff, you think you've got it all together. And you don't realize that you're poor and naked and blind. I'm going to spit you out of my mouth, the risen Christ says. Now, blindness in the Scripture is a serious deal. And I want to just underline it because Jesus here, look at Luke 6 now. Jesus is warning specifically. He says, a blind man can't guide a blind man, can he? No, they'll both end up in a pit. A pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone, after he's been fully trained, will be like his teacher. He's warning. Don't sit under blind guides. Don't be led down the aisle of life, which isn't an aisle, is it? That's a fairly limited little situation to get back to the back of the airplane. But life isn't like that. No, he says, don't be guided by blind guides. You'll both end up in the pit. Now, at the risk of making a distinction I really don't want to make, I'm going to say that's true in your life, and that's true in the church. Scott, are you saying that those two are? No, I'm not. But I just want us, they're not separate at all. But I want us to remember some things because where do you get your guidance from? Or let me put it this way, in 2012, where do we live? Who do we listen to? Who guides us? Who are our idols? Our leaders, our teachers. Well, even just saying the word idol, American Idol. Oh, I'd love to be a singer. I'd love to be an entertainer. Boy, they have a loud voice, don't they? Or boy, would I love to be the MVP, athletics. Or you realize that when they sold the stock in that he's an instant billionaire. Wow. Those are the kind of people that have an awful lot of influence in our culture at large, in our lives. And so we listen to their lyrics until we've got them memorized. We listen to their thoughts. Some guys know much more about Chip Kelly's philosophy than Jesus' philosophy. Or Vince Lombardi, the old generation, still quotes him. You know what Lombardi said? Or, Phil Jackson has an interesting way of looking at that. Or we're quoting Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or, you name it. And don't misunderstand me, you can get scraps of guidance, I suppose. But beware of letting those people who are blind. Ultimately, I don't know those people individually, but you know what I'm saying. Beware of getting your guidance, your mentoring. You say, I don't. Well, just stop and think about who you listen to, what you read, what you hear quoted at the office, etc. But then also in the church, Boy, this needs to be heard, verse 39 and 40. Beware of listening to blind guides. How many are sitting today listening to some guy in some pulpit who's blind, who doesn't even know Christ, who's unregenerate, but has a degree, or is eloquent, or he just knows what we need? He's so encouraging. I just go there and I just feel so good. Beware. Beware. There are apostate, whole denominations. It struck me in Africa because every denomination, one of the guys told me, are evangelical. Ones that over here you wouldn't hear any truth from, over there, they still hold to the Bible. But over here, you can go to a lot of churches, and I don't mean just the apostate denominationalism either. I mean also within evangelicalism. Turn your television on, don't. But, just check it out. And this soft Christian cliches, throw in Jesus, hold the Bible up, but just tell people what they want to hear. Beware of blind guides. You might both end up in the pit. And there's 100 ways to apply this. I always cringe when young men get into the academic world and really go for it. Not that they shouldn't, but they should be very careful. Because the academic world within evangelicalism honors apostasy, blindness, European unbelief. Just like you might see in politics, people say, well, in Europe, here's what they do. Do we want to be that? Take a look. Well, in theology, unbelief reigns in Europe, and yet the most prestigious degrees to become a teacher in our seminaries are European. And it goes from the blindness of the academy to blindness in the pulpit to blindness in the pew to the pit. And you say, oh, Scott, that's harsh. Well, I said it. Can't take it back. I don't want to. It bothers me. Beware. Now, verse 40 primarily is a warning. You'll become like your guide, your teacher, your blind one. So be careful. But turn that around, young man, young woman, middle-aged person, I don't care who you are, what age you are. Turn that around and apply it in a positive way. A pupil is not above his teacher. Everyone, after he's been fully trained, will be like his teacher. Pick out a guide, not a blind guide, but a guide who can teach you truth. Pick out a mentor that will guide you to Christ. And ultimately, pick out the teacher. Because Jesus said in Matthew 23, don't be called rabbi. There's one teacher. Don't be called father, because there's one Father. Huh? And then I'm teaching John 13 downtown, and he said, you call me teacher. And you're right, because I am. So pick out the teacher who is the light of the world, and you'll become more and more like him. Verse 40 can be turned around, and I do it all the time in challenging young people and people of any age, that be careful what you listen to, but then get good truth and learn it, okay? Well, then the special danger of a critical spirit. Why do you look at the speck, verse 41, that's in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when you yourself don't see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. Wow. The special warning Jesus gives to you and me of a critical spirit. Oh, I prefer to call it discernment. I know, because I do. You got to be wise. You got to be discerning. But I'll tell you what, this matter of criticizing and correcting other people and quick to give counsel, and confront that over there, and never look here. Dangerous place to be. And Jesus says it in a way, doesn't he? I looked this up. I couldn't find this anywhere else. I thought this must be in every gospel because it seems it's one of those statements that grabs you. If you've read the Bible at all, you've probably read this. And his picture, it's such a vivid picture that you can't miss it. Somebody with a telephone pole in their own eye saying, let me get this sliver out of your eye. And you've lived there, right? You've been the recipient of that. Someone who feels the need to get the speck out of your eye. But I'm not talking about that now, and Jesus isn't either. He's talking about you and me with our log in our own eye, digging at somebody else's little flaw. Boy, nothing so undermines a marriage than finding the flaw in your spouse all the time and going to help them with it. Boy, be careful. Scott, you don't know my husband, though. No, I don't. But I can guarantee you, you didn't marry a perfect man. And if you're busy finding the specks in his... Oh, but Scott, she... You don't realize... No, I don't. I'm just telling you. Listen to Jesus. Be careful about being quick to see the flaw in the other person. It undermines relationship. Parents. Some parents I know they see everything wrong with their teenager. Be careful there. Check out where they might just be a chip off the old block. Be careful of a critical spirit. Nothing so undermines a church, and nothing is so contagious. Did you know? And just pick out the specks while not dealing with the logs in your own life. We have that tendency in our culture. We just cultivate that. We want to have constant evaluations. I loved the way the conferences I just came from, those pastors' conferences in Africa, and they've learned a lot from some of the things we do in the States, and some of it's good and some of it's not. But I was shocked because at the end, we'd had this spiritual feast, and there was such good rapport and dynamic, and they every day they served this meal, and it was just a great spiritual feast and a great week, and at the end, they did something we do here in the States that always kind of drives me crazy. Okay, now we have an evaluation sheet. Tell us what we did wrong, what we did right. We really want to know what happened here. And so the first thing people are saying, that one meal was crummy. And I'm going, ouch. What a way to kind of just diffuse what had just happened. And we cultivate that, don't we, often? Be careful about a critical spirit. You know, they asked me to teach on Jude. That was the theme, actually, the theme text. And, you know, Jude is like a preface. It lays in the Bible like the foreword to the final book, Revelation. And so Jude said, I'd like to teach you about the common gospel. I wanted to share the faith with you and just have a kind of a teaching time, but I felt constrained to warn you and to protect the faith because in the last days, and then it's just a one-page exhortation about the last days. And he ends up by saying, turn over there. It's a one-pager. You can look at it. Jude. He walks through history in one page. And he says, you know, it's going to get worse. And he even quotes Enoch in the seventh generation from Adam, verse 14, about these also. Enoch in the seventh generation from Adam prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord comes with many thousands of his holy ones. Enoch even prophesied when Jesus Christ returns, and he said he's going to come to execute judgment, verse 15, upon all, and to convict all the ungodly of all their ungodly deeds which they've done in an ungodly way, and all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. The last days are going to be ungodly, 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 ungodly He used the term 4 times. Did you see it? In one verse. Enoch said that. That's what the Bible says. Now, you and I, here's what I think when I think ungodly. I look around at our world and I say, yeah, boy, look at that. And I go like this, don't you? And we should. It is an ungodly day we're living in. But read verse 16. These are grumblers, fault finders. Ouch. Wow. In the last days, you mean to say there'll be those who'll be finding fault, getting the speck out of somebody else's eye instead of looking at the log in their own? That's what we're like. Blind to our own error. So be careful of false teaching and critical spirit go hand in hand. And Jesus warns here about both. Luke 6. You'll know them by their fruit. There's no good tree, verse 43, which produces bad fruit, nor, on the other hand, a bad tree which produces good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they pick grapes from a briar bush. Jesus said this often. He closed his most famous sermon, "You will know them by their fruits," speaking about false teachers, false prophets, Matthew 7. As I said, he often said these things. The New Testament has this almost as a theme. When John the Baptist came on the scene, he called out the hypocrisy and he said, how about you bring forth some fruit in keeping with your so-called repentance? Remember that? We saw that back in Luke 3. You see it almost everywhere. Jesus repeatedly talked about fruit. And I love, and I've already quoted it, what he told the guys on the final night when he said, listen, I'm the vine, you're the branches. You can't do anything apart from me. But if you'll abide, if the vine abides, if a branch abides in the vine, that's the source of life, and you'll bear much fruit, and my Father will be glorified. Fruit is a common metaphor in the New Testament. In fact, the Holy Spirit's ministry will be seen how? The fruit of the Spirit in my life, in your life, will be love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. It won't be just what we say and do in a religious way or just our doctrinal list that we check off, but it will be love, joy, peace, Christ-like lifestyle, fruit. Even the epistles. You know, Romans builds in its explanation of the gospel, and you get to Romans 7, and he says, you used to bear fruit to death, but now you've been wed to another, you're united to the risen Christ, and you can bear fruit to God. So fruit bearing is very important, Jesus said, and he said, you know, where there's real life, there'll be real fruit. And outward fruit will show inward reality. You can know the root of a tree, not by digging it up and looking at the root, but just by watching and see what the fruit comes out. You'll know, oh, that's an apple tree. He uses simple analogy like that. And somebody says, well, what is the fruit then that Jesus is looking for? And what is the fruit? We'll look at his text here. He says, the good man, verse 45. He just said the good tree will bear good fruit, the bad tree will bear bad fruit. He says, the good man, out of the good treasure of his heart, brings forth what is good, and the evil man, out of the evil treasure of his brings forth what is evil. For his mouth speaks from what fills his heart. He said, the fruit will be, first of all, conversation. What comes out of your mouth? And then it will be seen in conduct, verse 46 through 49. So that's how Jesus kind of ties this together, how he explains what he's after here. And he says the fruit will be, first of all, you'll see it. You won't even see it, you'll hear it. It's what comes out of the mouth, conversation. We'll look at that one. We're not going to look at the conduct one, but I wanted to say it and wanted to read it because it so summarizes what he's saying. But we'll take a second look at that metaphor that he draws there at the end. next week. But just think about conversation for a minute. The mouth shows what's in the heart. That's what Jesus said when Peter said, Lord, do you realize that's bugging the Pharisees? That's offending them. That's what he just said. God is looking for the inward reality, and you'll see it as it, not what goes in. Oh, I don't drink this, I don't taste that, I don't touch that, nothing defiles me. No, he says that's not what defiles us. What comes in, it's what comes out, which shows the heart. And most of Matthew 15 is talking about that. And so just think about this and think about it in life, because a lot of the truisms that we might tend to live by are false. We say things like, well, you can't know a man's heart. Jesus said you can. Just listen to his mouth. It's like a big window. When I was a kid, I don't know when they came into vogue, but I remember when we moved from one house that had small windows to this place that my folks called it a picture window. Remember those? Big windows. And we said, our place has a picture window. Well, I often think that the mouth is a picture window into the heart. You can know what's going on. When vile, judgmental, bitter, selfish, greedy, stinginess comes out of the mouth, you can know what's going on in the heart. When self-righteousness, bragging, boastfulness comes out of the mouth, it's like a picture window into the heart. And when there's a joyous gratitude, when you hear one who can't talk to you very long, but what he's talking about Jesus, she just changes the subject and you'll find her talking about her Savior. You can know what's going on in the heart. And we ought to listen to our own conversations. Jesus said, his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. So no one can know a man's heart. Not so true. Or you hear people say one way or another, and I know he swears, but his heart is good. No. No. What's coming out of the mouth is coming from the heart. Be careful. Be careful. And you can just fill in the blank there, you know. Well, I know he says, I know he never talks about Christ, but you can just tell he loves him. How? If he never talks about him. Be careful, young person. Listen to what comes out of the mouth. You can learn a lot about a person by simply listening. Good and bad. The mouth is tied to the heart. Is that foolproof? Of course not. Jesus warned about just saying and not doing. And in fact, that's what he comes up with here. He goes right to conduct, verse 46 and following. But conversation is something that we can learn a lot from. Well, Jesus said, I'll tell you who the fool is and who the wise man is. And, he says, those who hear this and don't do anything about it, or those who hear this and act upon it. So let's just stop before we close and just say, okay, what about it? Are you being guided by the blind? Well, Scott, I'm in your church. You're the pulpit guy. Well, beware. Check out everything I say by the Bible. But I'm talking about where we really live. Who do you quote? Is it the entertainers of this world? The musicians? Is that where the lyrics that you're just mulling over until they become yours? Is it the View? Are you listening to Whoopi? You say, well, that doesn't matter. No, that gives you a certain view, doesn't it? Are you inadvertently, 40, 60 hours a week at work thinking about, well, what did Steve Jobs say anyway? Or what's the latest? If you're listening to blind guides, don't be surprised if it leads to kind of blindness. Now, don't misunderstand me and all that. We can pick up bits and snatches from all around us, and we better. But who is really mentoring you? Where do you really get your input? Who is your guide? Make sure you're not being guided by the blind. Is it a problem? Oh, wow. Look at evangelicalism today. Need I say more? We're often just aping after whatever the world is saying. Be careful about who is guiding you. You young people, it's fine. I mean, I love sports. I watch way too much of it, and I still try to play too much of it. But you know what I'm saying? Don't let the successful coaches be your guide for life. Pick and choose, learn a little something, but find a real guide. Find a mentor who knows Christ and lives for Christ, and make sure your ultimate teacher, that you're a disciple not of so-and-so or so-and-so, Paul or Apollos, but Jesus Christ. Critical spirit. Do you find yourself, and you fancy yourself a discerning person? Beware all the more. Those of us who think that we're quite discerning, we're all the more apt to be fault finders because we see the flaws in the church. And we just need to point them out. Be careful. Check out the log in your own eye before you start correcting your wife about the speck in her eye, or your husband, or even your kids. And don't misunderstand me. You're to parent your children, particularly at the young age. You guide and direct. But as they age and mature, don't just constantly be looking for the specks in their life. Or don't be surprised if they want to spend less and less time with you and less willing to open up their heart to you. And that's true in all relationships, isn't it? If you're just good at finding the sawdust in somebody else's eye when you've got big old briar and branches in yours, be careful of a critical spirit. And then I ask you, is your life bearing this kind of fruit? Your conversation. Listen. Listen to what you tend to talk to out in the foyer or in the parking lot or tomorrow morning at work, because out of the mouth, there's a window into the heart. Now, I'll close with this. Jesus said, I'm the vine. We must be vitally related to Him. I repeat myself. Christian living is not a checklist of virtues to go start working on. You've got to know Christ. You might be here in a group like this. There's disciples, there's apostles, so to speak, the 12, and then there's the throng. And you may have never really put your faith in Christ. Come to Jesus Christ, confess your sin. You must be vitally related to Him. Apart from Him, you can do nothing. And then those of us who know Him, let's remember, Christian living is not working on virtues. Christian living is abiding in Him. Now it involves, don't misunderstand me, when God's Word penetrates my heart, I better start working on my language or what I talk about. But I can't do it on my own. It's not a self-help thing. I need to spend time with Him, abide in Him, and He will bear this fruit.